Coming up on Unsaid, the Ellie effect.
So for me, initially it started out verbally and emotional abuse, which then later turned into financial abuse and then physical.
Welcome to Unsaid, the Ellie effect. This is a space for the parts of our stories we don't always say out loud, the things we carry but rarely name, the questions that sit in the background, the thoughts we silence before they ever leave our lips. A place where we don't rush past the truth, we sit with it, we listen to it, and we allow it to surface. Because sometimes what we think we're searching for isn't the real need at all. And today's conversation goes right there. I'm honored to welcome Diana. Diana is a wife, a mother, and a woman of faith whose journey has been shaped by healing, growth, and transformation. She is the author of Gracefully Virtuous, a journey into the heart of Proverbs 31 woman, a devotional born from her own personal process of refinement and rediscovery. What began as a desire to be Ruth, to find her Boaz, became something much, much deeper. A call to look inward, to confront emotional wounds, and to redefine her identity through truth rather than pain. Out of that journey, she created a Proverbs 31 challenge that has now grown into a movement, guiding women to pursue growth, character, and alignment with intention. Diana, thank you for being here today and allowing us with your space, to tell your story.
Thank you for
Welcome.
having me.
Yes, we're glad you're here. We're so glad you're here. But like I say always, let's get into it, okay?
Let's do it.
So Diana, before we get into everything that you're doing like right now, um, I want to start, with you right now, where you're at in this season. And in your intro, you said something that I think a lot of women can relate to. You wanted to be Ruth so that you can find your Boaz. So can you take me back to the version of you, and what did you really mean at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, you know, there was a lot of trending going on social media,
Mhm.
especially on TikTok, about becoming a Proverbs 31 woman,
Mhm.
finding their Boaz.
Mhm.
I was single, you know, and as a single mother, I was like, okay, this is all I got to do to find me a husband. I've been in the church a couple of years. Like, I got saved when I was a child, but I had split away,
Mhm.
and I came back into church a couple of years ago, and I'm like, well, I still ain't found a man, Lord.
Mhm.
So I saw this trend, and I saw people getting married after doing it and whatnot, and I was like, oh, all I got to do is read who Boaz married and figure out what she did.
Mhm.
Easy enough,
Mhm.
So I went straight to the book of Ruth, read the story. And when I was reading, there was a line that Boaz said to Ruth where he calls her and says she's the most virtuous woman. And I was like, that's a pretty good character trait. What does he mean by that? And that's where I got into diving into what does virtuous mean? What does it mean in the natural world? What does it mean in the spiritual world? And upon, my research doing that, I was led to Proverbs 31. A whole chapter, half of a chapter written about a virtuous wife. I said, wow, this is easy, God. You just made this lining on up for me,
Yeah.
and so I began reading it. I had read it before, but I, you know, didn't really know what I was doing with it. And I read it and I'm like, oh, she does a lot.
Mhm.
She does a lot. And I'm like, there's no way that I can just do all of these things and, God's going to deliver me a man on my door like an Amazon package. Like, that's not how this works. So it's got to be
Mhm.
something else to it. You know, I went into prayer and I began to study it. Along that journey, as I was studying it, we have a women's fellowship at our church. I created a Proverbs 31 challenge, and with the blessing of, my pastor and co-pastor, I was able to put it out to them, and we were able to walk through that. We did it individually, but together. Um, and from there, God just kept pressing it on my heart. Yes, this challenge was great. Yes, I learned how to get up early. Yes, I learned how to steward my time and my finances. But it's deeper than that. And that's where he's pushed me into making a devotional showing that Proverbs 31 isn't just a performance. It's not just a checklist, you know. It's a way of life. It's not that yes, I have to wake up every morning at 4:30 and spend time with God, but what am I really doing that for? Why do I need to do that? And that's what the devotional goes into.
Okay. So I heard you say that, you got saved early and
hmm
then you went on out, then straight. So what drove you back in? What was that drive to get you back in to like where you're at in this moment?
So it wasn't necessarily a driving back in.
Hmm.
I felt like God's been calling me since I was a small child. When I got saved, when I went to church, I was the only person in my household going to church. I started going to church at 8 by myself. So God's been calling me since I was a small child. When I stepped away, I was about 16,
Hmm.
about the average age.
Yes.
I grew angry with God for some of my own reasons, which it'll be in another book.
Okay.
But when I got here to Colorado, I had been through so much. I had gotten out of a 10-year relationship that dealt with domestic violence and neglect and abuse from family members as well. We moved out here to Colorado, and the first place we lived in, believe it or not, my townhome got shot up, and I was considering moving back to Nebraska.
Mhm.
And it was just like 2 weeks before my birthday. I went to the nail shop the day of my birthday, and I met someone there. She had a Faith Week shirt on. And I complimented her on her shirt. And I was like, "Where'd you get that? I like that." And she was like, "Oh, it's from my church." And I had always wanted to find God again. I just didn't know where to look. So it was really just him opening the door and me stepping in and showing up.
Okay. So, because I heard you, because a lot of women deal with coming out of long-term relationships, and especially getting into like, domestic violence. Can you touch on it just a little bit? Because I know you said you're going into another book. I don't want you to give them too much space, but just touch
Yeah.
on it a little bit because there are women out there who, trying to find a way to get back, and just a little bit of your story will help them.
Yeah. So even when I was in that relationship, I had married him. Um, we we went through our times. I was searching for God then as well, but not like really searching. I was like, I'm gonna walk in this church. If you there, I'm gonna stay. If you not, I'm out.
Uh-huh.
You know, and I was kind of asking God to meet me, but I also wasn't in a place to be met. You know, um, I really had to hit rock bottom to leave that relationship, and that is unfortunate. I wish I would have had the village, the spiritual family, the people around me that I needed around me to help me get out of those situations. I wish I would have told someone sooner. I had a best friend who she was a friend of mine before I even got married, you know, and she never knew
Mhm.
until, it got to the point where there was no return, which included attempted overdoses. Once we got there and I was at my rock bottom, it was okay, somebody else has to get involved, you know. Um, that story, that part of my life, it was terrible. And instead of running to God, I just kept trying to manage it myself, which is why I ended up staying so long. Yeah, I tried to leave several times. I would go get a new house, let him come. Go get another house, let him come, you know? And that's a story we see too often, you know?
So getting into that, what kind of abuse was it? Was it, something that I had to put my hands on you? Was it verbal? Sometimes it's financially. I know it's a lot of different forms of abuse. I've heard it from many women. So what was it?
So for me, initially it started out verbally
Mm.
and emotional abuse, which then later turned into financial abuse and then physical. I had gotten so stressed out behind the situation, I ended up getting sick. I was diagnosed with lupus during that relationship, and those flares can be called, brought up through stress. And um, with that, I was dealing with treatment for lupus, which included chemo, while still getting beat, while still being financially abused. He's taking money to do what he wants to do with it, and I have to figure out a way to pay the bills, you know, while being cheated on, lied to, manipulated. And because no one knew what happened behind closed doors, it made it very hard for me to even think about getting out. I
Mm.
also had a child with him. Every time I had tried to leave previously, my child would act up. I would let him come back, thinking that was what was best for my son. And it wasn't.
Wow. That's a lot.
Hmm.
That's a lot. Um, and sometimes we just have to take a deep breath and be like, wow, you know. When did you, at some point, I know you had to come to self, like you said, you hit rock bottom. When was it that you started to actually believe in you?
That took a while. That took a long time. Even when the VA stepped in to help me, and they were like, we're going to help you get out of the situation. You need to tell some of your friends, and I told two of my friends. Even when I had gotten to that point, it wasn't it wasn't easy, because now I'm thinking, oh, I'm about to be divorced, single, and sick
Mm,
with two young boys. They were 7 and 8, you know, that I have to take care of. And it was scary, you know. Um, it wasn't even a belief in me that got me through it.
yeah.
Once I was able to obtain a new apartment and the divorce was finalized, COVID hit.
Oh.
So here I am on chemo with COVID flying around, terrified to go outside. And that's where I found God. God came to me there. He didn't come to me in a church. He didn't come to me at the altar. He came to me there and met every need we needed during that time. Bills were paid, food was in full supply, the kids had everything they needed, and they were happy. And it was then that I started to be like, well, I'm not doing this. You know, I don't know how he keeps making all this stuff happen, but thank you. And that was probably one of the most grateful times in my life. And my friend who was helping me during that time, um, she had a tough life.
Mhm.
She had went down way down a wrong path, and she was like, I got a daughter, I got to be a better representation. I'm gonna go back to God.
Mhm.
She has a little bit different beliefs than me, you know, but it was through her studying that made me realize, hey, I see you're becoming devout and I appreciate that,
Mhm.
but I can't go with you. And that's where everything I learned when I was younger started coming back to me. And from there, I started talking with God again
Mhm.
and letting Him lead my life and getting me out of there, bringing me here to Colorado.
Amen to that. I, the- your story is so, one in a million. It's like I've heard the story, but you never close up. It's never close up in person. You can hear it on TV,
Hmm.
and all that. But what did you have to confront within yourself that you weren't expecting?
Christianity isn't something you do.
Come on.
It's not something you can check off. You can't
Mm-mm,
just show up Sunday and Wednesday
mm-mm.
and live the same life that you do without any
You
change
can't.
and expect God to move.
Jesus. You
That
can.
is the biggest thing I had to confront,
Wow.
and probably one of the hardest, because I'm showing up for church.
Hmm.
I'm reading my chapter a day. I'm spending time in prayer. But then I'm going out and I'm having a drink.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going out and I'm meeting men. I'm going out and, I'm cussing and yelling and fussing, you know? And it's a heart change. Why do I want to be a Christian?
Mm-hmm.
For what? What am I going to get out of it? How is it going to change my life? It was understanding the promises of God and knowing that I could have those, but I had to be obedient just like I asked my children to be obedient to me.
So let's talk about how this Proverbs 31 challenge came to life. I see that a lot of things led up to that, and I heard you talk about, you know, what was Christianity. Like I was going out, I was having fun, I was
hmm
meeting men, but then you got to Proverbs 31. Tell me, talk about
So Proverbs 31 was a game changer for
it.
me,
Game changer.
but it wasn't a game changer in the way I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be easy. I thought it was going to be a checklist. Then when God gave me this challenge, I was like, okay, I'll do the challenge, you know? And again, even with that, I thought it was going to be easy.
Mm-hmm.
But, and it can be to a certain extent. If you look at Proverbs 31 from a natural perspective and you say, oh, I can get up early.
Mm-hmm.
I can work with my hands. I can do all of these things. It becomes a checklist. But how does that change your heart?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what God wanted me to see. He didn't want me to be a Proverbs 31. He wanted me to take on characteristics of a virtuous woman so that I could glorify Him in His name. And when I realized that that Proverbs 31 challenge was more for me than it was for anybody, I was like, hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on, Lord. What are we doing here?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized He was asking me to do a heart shift, to change the posture of my heart and become the woman that He was calling me to be instead of being someone who can perform and look the part, but not actually be it. So that challenge for me was an awakening, a spiritual one at that. And I'm not perfect. And part of the reason the devotional is called A Journey into the Proverbs 31 Heart is because it is a journey. I don't know if I'll ever be done with it. And that's because God is continuing to grow me in specific areas. And every time I read it, every time I read one of those verses, I say, hey, I'm not in this season. I just finished that one. I'm in this one. And I can see this one's coming up,
Mm-hmm.
but we're human,
Yes.
so it makes it okay. I don't have to be everything at once. I can be right where I'm at. And He's going to meet me and develop me.
Awesome. So I know that I always hear it. He who findeth a wife findeth a good thing. So I know you said you and early in your story, you found your Boaz.
I did.
Yes. Did
Praise
he
God.
find you or you found him?
I think we found each other.
Okay. So
Yeah.
tell me about that journey.
Um, it was not too long ago.
Okay.
It was about 9 months ago.
Okay.
um, yeah, we found each other. We talked for a few weeks, and then we went out. And he just has a good heart, right? And he's saved. And he has areas that he needs to be developed in as well.
Mhm.
You know, neither one of us is perfect, but we're not expecting perfect. It's been through a lot of his encouragement that has pushed me to take this devotional from some basic pages that I did on the challenge to really diving deep into this. Um, so I'm thankful for him, and that's something that I also want to talk about in the future is, you know, what does Boaz look like?
Ah,
You
and
know.
that's funny because that was going into because uh, Boaz has some example of a worthy man. He has all these characteristics that
hmm
that we're supposed to take on and that men's supposed to take on, and we're like, uh, you know. So tell me about that. I know you want to get into it, so let's go there.
Yeah. So I mean, my Boaz, my husband,
Yes.
he his characteristics are completely opposite of everything that I've encountered prior to. my pastor is a man of God,
Mhm.
and I love that. But God also works through my husband to reach
Mhm.
me. And I love that so much. And that he's willing and that he's open and he's not afraid to tell me, what are you doing?
Mhm.
Did you write today? You know, pastor not going to tell me that Sunday on while he preaching his word. I mean, he may in some ways, but
Uh-huh.
that's for everyone,
Yeah.
you know. So having someone who knows my heart, knows what God is requiring of me and of him, and putting that in place so that we can meet his purpose is what Boaz is for me. Is what my husband is for me. Having someone who's not going to hurt me, abuse me, use me, but help develop me and encourage me to become the woman of God that God is trying to instill in me so that I can help support our households, so that I can help other women out there who have dealt with childhood trauma, who have dealt with domestic violence relationships, who have dealt with insecurities and not knowing who they are. You know, that is what my Boaz
Okay, so I hear you talking about, Boaz and your Boaz.
is.
But in the process of dating, when you were looking and he was looking, you know, did you think about all the things that you went through when you came upon him? Like, is this gonna be, a repeat? Did you those trauma come up? Did trauma come up?
Absolutely. You know, when you dealt with trauma, not just from domestic violence, but also childhood trauma as well, you have triggers. And it could be things that aren't even related to him that triggered me. The difference was his response. When I told him about those triggers,
Hmm.
his response made everything different. His response came from a place of love, came from a place of care, trying to help me understand and process what I was feeling, you know, and taking a lot of that stuff to God, trying to work through it. And even therapy. I recently started back to it, not because he's causing triggers,
Hmm.
but what I've learned is sometimes when you go from environments where there's trauma after trauma after trauma to an environment where there's no
Oh.
trauma,
Hmm.
you can almost create it yourself.
Yes.
And that is something that I'm scared to do. I don't want to bring trauma to him. I have to work on me. I have to figure out what I've let in or what I have not gotten rid of.
Mm.
And it's so funny how God will let you see areas that you still need to be delivered in when you think, I'm not worried about none of that.
Mm.
I don't have to deal with any of the pain or the trauma or the hurt from past relationships with my exes or my family members. And really all I did was lock it up in a box and compartmentalize it in the back of my mind.
Hmm.
It never went anywhere. I never gave it to God. I didn't do any of that. But it took me having something so good for me to see, hey, you still have hurt in your heart. You still have unforgiveness in your heart. You still have things you need to work on in this area as well. So I think having this relationship is also growing me in other areas as well. It's allowing me and making me want to deal with it. Where before, I didn't want to think
You
about
want to
it.
think about
Again, it was a performance. I'm good.
it? All right.
I'm okay.
Put the
I'm
face on.
fine.
Hmm.
And no one knows my story. No one knows his story, how he delivered me from out of those areas.
All right. So I am so thankful that I got to hear your story. But before we go, I want you to look into that camera right here. And I want you to tell the women out there, that's been through trauma, that's waiting and looking for their Boaz. Give them some encouragement.
Ladies, women of God, children of God that are becoming young women, as you're on your journeys in your life to find your Boaz, realize that finding God is the greatest gift. And when you find God, when you seek Him continually, He will partner you with the right person. Don't go into those relationships with a ton of checklists. If He's not like God, then be careful. But go in expecting to see God in your relationship, expecting to see God in that man, and know that there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Pray for discernment, pray for strength and patience, and trust God through the process. Let Him develop you first. Once you're developed, He will bring you what you need.
Thank you, Diana. So I just want to say thank you to Diana for her honesty, your vulnerability, and sharing not just for your transformation, but the journey it took to get here. So what you reminded us today is that becoming isn't about perfection. It's about doing the work, confronting the truth, and choosing growth, even when it's uncomfortable. And for those listening, if any part of this conversation felt familiar, if you've ever questioned your worth, carried wounds in silence, or found yourself searching for something outside of you to feel whole, you are not alone. This space was created for you, where we don't skip the hard parts, where we sit with the truth, and where we make room for what's been left unsaid. Until next time, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. This is Unsaid, the Ellie Effect. Listen, if you have something unsaid, something real, something unspoken, and you want to be a guest, holla at your girl at unsaidtea@gmail.com.